So I put down a scenario. You've got 6 months with a new first-time founder, working with to go from high-level product or high-level idea to product. What are some things you do to win, to put out something great? So in my role, I'm often in a situation where the founders coming in and they are the ones coming in with industry experience, and we're good at, we're good at tech, we're good at product, and we're trying to like marry those two things. So as a product leader, I'm keen to know how you might approach that scenario.
Cool. Yeah, that's a great question. So in a previous life, I ran a startup studio for 5 years, and we built 50 different products in that time, with a team of at max size we were 12. But yeah, I've spent a lot of time doing this. And the big thing for me comes down to focus. So you get that infamous triangle in software. It's good, cheap, and fast. Pick two, and you kind of have to move within that constraint. But the way that you break that entire model is just by making the triangle really, really tiny. Because if you have a really small scope, you can build it good, cheap, and fast. If you're building a very, very narrow focus. And so the biggest problem that I have with founders is they often come in and they've got this whole solution built out in their head, and they anything less than that entire platform or that entire app with all these features just isn't their vision. We can't build that. We have to have everything. Is often that's normally the biggest barrier you have to try and overcome. And part of the problem is how you pull that apart gently, and working out what is dependent and what is related. So often features, like if you look at in their app that they envisage, there's probably a bunch of menu items across the bottom. Which of those menu items can you ship with nothing else? And what is a piece that you can deliver that is related to the other stuff but not dependent on it, or that the other stuff is dependent on this? A friend of mine, David Campy, created a framework called iteration design, which kind of was used to solve exactly that kind of conversations that we're having. I've just closed Miro. I'll open it up now and show you my template that I use for this. This is a draft in one of my blog posts, but it's really about helping founders put down their idea of what they want to do, and then zoom back out to or zoom back to where they are today and work out what are the steps that we can build. And it's effectively drawing a dependency map of getting your customers from where they are today to where you want them to get, or where you want to get them. So I'll just share my screen quickly for those that are a window, Miro. So I'm not quite sure why this is gray. Hello? Why is Miro grayed out? Sorry, let me just try and refresh. Something's not working. Anyway, but basically this is what we start with. So it starts with a customer, a jobs to be done customer segment profile from the value proposition canvas. And then we expand those jobs out into various different customer jobs. There aren't normally quite this many, but that's just the template. And then what we do is we take these jobs and we throw them over to a one-day solution, and we'll map out a one-day solution. So create all of the bells and whistles and everything that they have in their head about what they might want to do. And then what we do is we say, okay, this is where we are today. What solutions can we deliver? And this is kind of what this becomes, the green sticky notes become things that we pull up and then move into 1 month, 6 months, 12 months. And then I draw arrows towards each other to see how they stack and how the dependencies build towards your one-day solution. And what that allows you to do is it allows the entrepreneur to get a thread from where they are today to where they're wanting to go. And it allows them to ship a smaller version because they understand how that smaller version is playing into a longer vision, or playing into the longer vision of where they're trying to get to. So that's kind of how I work with founders, is trying to work out what is that core value that they're delivering. And normally there's going to be a bunch of different value propositions, a bunch of different gaps in that. And so we try and identify one or two like core things that we need to kind of start with earlier. And then we start doing like, how do we validate this? How will we know whether this is true or not? Custom interviews, scripts, MVPs, landing pages, those sort of things to start validating. Those are all the dependency map. Those are the steps that you'd follow before you build the first thing. Because there's nothing more expensive than building the wrong software. And so how do we know we're building the right one? Well, we ship it and see if it's actually delivering what we need. And often shipping a slightly less polished version of what you're needing to do is a really great way to see if you're solving a really big problem. Because if it's a massive problem for people will use a shitty solution. If it's not a massive problem and it's a bit clunky and they're like, oh, I don't like this button, it's like, no, I'm not going to use this. Like, that's a really great indicator that it's really not such a big pain point for them, or that there are much better options out there. It's quite a competitive market, and you need to try and refine the product more to find a real pain point for what you're focusing on. So by focusing, I always like to, when you're working with new product developments, I always like to build out from a customer segment profile into a value proposition canvas, and only then into like business model canvases and stuff much further down the line. Normally, before we get to a business model canvas, I'll look at doing a product ecosystem map of just like how the product works, or a customer stakeholder map, and then how does our product, how do all those stakeholders engage with our product, and what does that look like? And by drawing those maps out, you can normally get a relatively good idea of the type of product or the type of solution that you need to build. And then you can say, well, let's just deliver this one piece for this one customer. And once we've got that, we can then expand out, and you can start creating your product strategy and your product roadmap by defining which value propositions you're going to tackle first and how you're going to convert that, mostly through a dependency and relatedness measure.
Okay, thanks very much. So it's important to come alongside the founder, kind of workshop and get a good understanding of like the broader vision, potentially break that down into shorter releases. All right, thanks very much.
Yeah, and the way you do shorter releases, like not all features are equal, right? So what one thing can we ship without anything else? And by asking that question and run this experiment on yourself first, and then run it through with them, so that you kind of have a bit of where you're trying to guide them towards. But say like, hey, we can ship this value proposition and build up, like if often like dual-sided marketplaces and stuff, we can ship an adjacent solution to this customer segment, and once we have enough of them, we can then bring the other customer segments on and open up the marketplace field. But there's this actual value that we can deliver right now for them of helping them manage their inventory, and then over time we can launch that real business, which is the marketplace that unlocks that inventory for other people. So there might be ways that you can focus in on a specific subset of a value proposition to get a toehold in a market.
Okay. Can I squeeze in a follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead.
How far would you go with wanting to break these things up? Like, for instance, if it was core value that like has a payments gateway or like a subscription model, would you be pushing to strip away payments subscriptions and release like the core user flow to a group without that, and then later on build in subscriptions, or do you put the core user flow out with subscriptions at the same time?
Yeah, so subscriptions can be quite tricky to implement. So yes, often you can strip that out, sell the first 3 months as like a starting trial, or give it free for the first month while they sign up. That gives you a month of testing before you actually have to ship the payments feature. So ship it without payments first, and a month later ship it with payments. I can roll out, oh, your subscription's up, click here to pay, and now all of a sudden the payments features are live. So there are definitely ways of doing that. Often payments themselves, like just credit card payments or something, is like that's very much a solved problem. So like embedding Stripe or Peach Payments or Paystack or whoever it is actually relatively trivial for developers now. So it's rare that I would strip out payments entirely to do that, but With B2B customers, payments is often quite complicated. And for the first 6 to 12 months, it might actually just be easier to have a person type up an invoice and email it off to them once a month than it is to try and include credit card payments or debit orders, or because the sign-off process is just way more complicated. So if payments is going to be a barrier to actually delivering value, then find a way to try and circumvent that. And in most technologies, like these things that make sense at scale, like when you only have 1 or 2 customers, like as Paul Graham says, do things that don't scale. Like you could totally have an intern writing out 50 invoices every month and emailing those off to customers. Like that is a totally legitimate strategy for the first 6 months. And it's probably going to be way cheaper than paying the developer to build the wrong thing. In fact, it's definitely cheaper to build the wrong thing, but it's probably cheaper to pay the intern than it is to pay the developer to build, even just integrate Stripe or Paystack or whatever. So like there's often a lot of ways of doing things manually in the beginning that you can actually just hack it manually. And that allows you to change it up and tweak it and change the formatting or change the layout or change the information. Like when you're manually sending things, they call it a Wizard of Oz MVP, when it looks like a fully functioning app on the front end, but actually there's a bunch of people just manually doing all the work and copying from Airtable into an email and shooting off a very clean looking email template. So it looks like an automated system, but it's all run by people. It allows you to change your pricing, your copy, that way you deliver it. Like you can run experiments literally every day to see what works better. As soon as you code it, you can't automate, you can't move that fast anymore, because now it's the whole thing's got momentum and inertia, and then to try and change it becomes much more difficult. So normally when you're trying to ship a new value proposition, the 3 phases you need to go through is do it, document it, and automate it. So you first do it yourself, like do it as the entrepreneur, as the founder, or whoever it is, build the least amount you need with like forms or whatever it is to manually do it yourself. Then write a step-by-step guide that you can give it to an intern that they can do exactly what you're doing and deliver the value proposition without you. And only then have you actually got a clear enough spec to give it to a developer to actually code it up. And so then what do you know? You've actually got the spec because it's a step-by-step guide on exactly what the developer needs to build. So do it, document it, then automate it. And for almost any new product or new project or whatever you're trying to build, you can almost always follow. I've yet to find something that you can't at least massage along that path. And normally by the time you get to coding it, by the time the value delivery needs to scale, it's already got so much momentum and you've already validated so much that it's probably not going to change much. And so you don't end up trying to like throw away a ton of code and trying to rebuild something else. And now you've got legacy database structures because you've changed the model so much. Whereas if you just run it through and run it through with people first, it's way cheaper, and it's way more iterative. And by the time that settles, then you automate by writing in code.
Thanks very much.